All right, so the PS5 Pro was just announced, and I want to go over just some quick key features, but I want to spend more time talking about who exactly is this console for. So, real quick, the main goal of this console is for players to be able to run games at a high fidelity mode while maintaining 60 frames per second. They're trying to achieve that with these three things: upgraded GPU, advanced ray tracing, and AI-driven upscaling using something called PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. Enhancements, also PS5 Pro Game Boost. So if you have older PS4 games, they're going to theoretically run a little bit better on PlayStation 5 Pro. Games cannot be identified with a PS5 Pro Enhanced label. They put some examples of games that at launch are going to be available that take advantage of PlayStation 5 Pro. And then the big one, the price, $699.99 USD, but it will include a 2 terabyte SSD. So that's double what is currently offered on PlayStation 5. And it will launch November 7th, and pre-orders begin September 26th, 2024. So those are really all the details that we'll put out there. And the big thing, of course, is I'm seeing a lot of conversations from people. The reactions are number one, it's extremely expensive. Understandable, I get that. But then the other thing that I've been hearing is, who is this for? Like, who would buy this? This is an unnecessary product. And that's the part that I sort of tend to disagree with, because we can look at any market, it doesn't matter what it is, and be dependent on what you are willing to pay for something, it's going to be very simple for you to say, why does this thing exist, right? The average American does not drive a Ferrari. It doesn't drive they don't drive a Lamborghini, right? The average American doesn't walk around wearing a $250 or $300 pair of sneakers, for example, rocking $1,000 Gucci t-shirts, right? But at the same time, even though for me personally, no, I would never pay $300 for a pair of sneakers. I would never pay $1,000 for a t-shirt, or even a couple $100 for a t-shirt. But that doesn't mean that those things should not exist. What it means is that those things are created for a different market than the one that I'm currently in and am comfortable with spending money on. And this conversation happens, once again, in any market that you tend to look at. For me personally, the question is $700 too much? Absolutely. I think $700 is too much for what this system is capable of and what it claims that it can deliver. So we have to compare this to the digital version of PlayStation 5, because neither of these ship with a disk drive. So the digital version of PlayStation 5 is $450. This version is $700. So the question is, depending on what they showed, right, do you think that this console is worth $250? For me personally, the answer is absolutely not. There's just no way. When Mark Cerny is sitting there and talking about, showing footage of Spider-Man 2, and he's saying, hey, look at the sharpness or the sharp detail of the leaves on the tree in the background. The only way that you're going to notice that is if you're not playing the video game that you're playing, right? It's only if you put your controller down that you're going to notice, wow, look at the sharpness of that guy that's, on the opposite corner of where Peter Parker is standing, right? Or, wow, look at the reflection of, this window as I'm swinging by it at 60 frames per second. Look at the sharpness of that reflection in the puddle. The only time that, as a gamer, you're noticing these things is when you slow down the game. It's either you're walking slow, or you're standing still, or you're moving the camera. When you're actually playing a video game, you're not noticing that. The only thing that I think makes a very noticeable difference in terms of a gameplay experience would definitely be 30 frames versus 60 frames per second. How many games that are currently locked at 30 frames per second on PlayStation 5 are now 60 frames per second default on PlayStation 5 Pro? I think that list is not large enough to warrant a $250 difference. For me personally, it looks like for this game, the first showcase game that they're going to really show in terms of a game that we haven't seen yet is more than likely going to be Death Stranding 2. There's a Tokyo Game Show segment happening later this month, and I'm pretty sure we're probably going to see Kojima playing this game on PlayStation 5 Pro. It's going to be a good showcase in terms of us being able to see gameplay of a game that we have not seen before, and what does that look like on PlayStation 5 Pro. And I'm sure they're going to talk about all the enhancements that that version has over the regular PlayStation 5 version. I'm a huge Death Stranding fan. But that game running at the highest fidelity at 60 frames per second, is it worth that difference of money to me? No, I just don't think it's going to be, especially for a person like me that plays games physical, right? So the physical version of PlayStation 5 Pro for us here in New York, after taxes, I did the math, it's going to be about $850. If I'm lucky to sell my current PlayStation 5 for $400, I still have to pay an extra $450. And what do I get out of that? Norman is going to look a little bit sharper on Death Stranding, right? I'm going to have a sharper bridges. I just don't think that it's worth it. I've said this before. I know that PlayStation is probably working very hard with Rockstar Games to try to get Grand Theft Auto 6 running at high fidelity at 60 frames. I don't think that game is going to ship at 60 frames on a regular PlayStation 5. I think it's going to ship at 30 frames per second. I don't think that there's going to be a fidelity and performance mode. Of course, I could be wrong. But that's a good incentive for PlayStation 5 Pro if that game launches in 2025, if it sticks that landing that they've put out there. Then PlayStation 5 Pro will, by default, be the best place to play Grand Theft Auto 6 because we know that it's not shipping with a PC version. I think that there are like simultaneous conversations happening where if this is something that you feel like is too expensive, you're right. If you're a person who says, "Oh, that actually sounds pretty good," I'd pay $700, or if you want physical, $800 plus in order to play Last of Us at the highest fidelity at 60 frames, keep that silky smooth frame rate. That's good for me. You're also correct. Both sides are correct about this. But to me, this whole question of like, this thing shouldn't exist, there's no reason for this thing to exist, I disagree with that notion, right? When a graphics card comes out, it's not just one version of a graphics card that NVIDIA releases. There are tiers and there are levels to it, and those levels are usually hundreds of dollars apart. You're trying to satisfy and address different parts of the market, and I think that's what PlayStation is doing here. If you read the first sentence of this blog post, it says, "Many have asked for a console that runs even higher fidelity graphics with smoother frame rates at 60 frames per second." What people need to understand is that when a company creates a product, it's not done on a whim. It's not like they dump all this R&D into a product and then think to themselves, "Man, I really hope this works." They have a pretty good idea that they're going to find some success. Does that mean that every single product sticks to landing and is successful? Of course not. That's not realistic. But it means that they have a good idea of what their addressable market is. And, one thing that I think that does make sense here is that this does not ship with a disk drive. I don't think that a console at this price point makes any sense to have multiple SKUs. Especially when you're selling a disk drive add-on separately that someone could just buy at the same time that they're ordering the digital edition of this console. You save yourself time, money, shipping, manufacture, all these costs because they feel confident that a good part of that market, that addressable market that's going to buy this console, is just going to buy the digital version and never buy a disk drive add-on for it. So I think PlayStation understands that the expectation is not in 2 years, PlayStation 5 owners are going to be 50% PS5, 50% PS5 Pro. That's not going to happen. I think they'd be lucky to have 1 in 5 owners have a PlayStation 5 Pro. I don't think they'd even reach 1 in 4. But I think that that's something that for them, they're like, yeah, we're okay with that because this is the market that we're trying to address. We're looking, we are advertising this console to our premium PlayStation fans. This is not, they understand that this is not going to be for everybody, and they're right. But I also feel like even though it's expensive, and I can agree that it is expensive, I don't think that means that this as an option should not exist, right? I just don't think so. When iPhones are introduced, there are different sizes, right? 256, 512, 1 terabyte drive. There are some people that don't need or want 1 terabyte of data. For people like me that maybe you do a lot of video, yeah, you kind of need or want 1 terabyte. So, those options are always very welcome. And I look at that with PlayStation 5. It's understandable when people say, like, this is a weird time in our industry because the price of everything is going up, right? The PlayStation 5 has technically gone up in price since it launched. It's gone up in price in Japan 3 separate times. The PlayStation 5 DualSense controller just went up by $5. PlayStation quietly raised the price of it by $5. It's I don't think it's enough for us to like, hey, let's ring the alarm. This is not really great. I think it is something to keep an eye on and to be kind of concerned about, especially when we talk about a future where PlayStation 5 doesn't have their main competitor in Xbox. The possibility of that scenario actually happening is a little bit scary. And I think that is a conversation to talk about, which is like, are we pricing people out of this hobby of video games because it just feels like this kind of is a little bit becoming like an expensive hobby to get into. But let's be honest, the base PlayStation 5 is not cheap by any means. $500 is a lot of money to a lot of people. So if you want to have that conversation, I feel like that conversation should have been had years ago, because $500 is also not cheap. This is something that is becoming a little bit of a premium hobby if you're a PlayStation fan. A lot of these conversations about whether this should exist reminds me a lot of PlayStation Portal, where similar conversations happened when that was announced. And even myself, I was thinking like, man, why would anyone pay this much money for an item like this that doesn't stream games? It's an accessory for the console. It can't exist on its own. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine who owns a PlayStation 5. He was telling me all the reasons why he was excited for PlayStation Portal. He was picking up day one. He was telling me, hey, let me know when pre-orders start. And that's when I realized, like, okay, there is an addressable market here. It's not the majority of PlayStation 5 owners, but there's enough of a market there that PlayStation is comfortable going after those specific consumers. And I think the same thing is happening here. I wouldn't really just dismiss this and say, oh, who's this for? I think PlayStation understands exactly who it's for, and they do understand that, once again, this is not something that the typical everyday consumer is going to purchase, especially when we think about the fact that we are in the year 2024. If we think about most console cycles lasting 6 or 7 years, that means we are 2 to 3 years away from PlayStation 6. So is it even worth it to buy this console, this at this moment in time? Even if you're thinking of upgrading from a PlayStation 4, when PlayStation 6 is kind of sort of right around the corner. And I think everyone is going to have a different answer to that question. And I think that's kind of okay. I think that's fine for there to exist a product that doesn't work for you, but it doesn't automatically mean that this shouldn't exist. I also think that this is a good testing ground for this AI machine learning technology, this PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, because this is obviously a piece of technology that will be used going forward and will definitely be something that launches with PlayStation 6. So I think it's good for PlayStation and their partners to gather a lot of data, to get used to having this as part of their workflow, because chances are very high that this is going to launch with the PlayStation 6. So I think that's another good positive here. I'm kind of curious as to how publishers and developers are responding to this, because how much time and money does this add to the workflow of developing a video game? Which is like, okay, do I want to go through this trouble of enhancing my video game when this addressable market is probably going to be tiny, especially starting off? I'm curious about the answers to those questions. We probably won't get them unless some developers speak up. But I think it is going to be a good testing ground for that PSSR. Let me know what you guys think down below. Is this something that you guys are going to pick up at launch? Do you think it's too expensive also? Just leave your comments down below. Like it if you liked it. Subscribe if you loved it. And please listen to the Camp Koji podcast. I'll talk about this more on next Monday's episode. Peace.